If you lose interest the moment you understand how something works, if mastery feels like the end instead of the beginning, if you've started 100 things and finished 12, welcome. You're not uncommitted. You're not lazy. Your brain just treats comprehension as the finish line. Or maybe you're dealing with someone like this, that person who masters skills, then abandons them. That partner who gets excited about projects, then ghosts them 3 weeks in. They're not afraid of commitment. They're addicted to the learning curve. And the moment the curve flattens, their nervous system screams for novelty. If someone just flashed in your mind, you already know this isn't about attention span. This is about something else entirely. These people don't quit because things get hard. They quit because things get solved. While everyone else celebrates expertise, they're already mentally checked out. Their dopamine comes from discovery, from the phase where everything is unknown and their brain is actively building the map. They can't stay engaged once they've decoded the system, can't maintain interest after they've seen the structure underneath, and when they try to force themselves to stay, it feels like suffocation. The frustration isn't about discipline, it's about motivation architecture. They're wired for exploration, not exploitation. Every moment spent optimizing something they already understand feels like time stolen from discovering something new. Every repetition feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And here's the uncomfortable part. They're often really good at the things they abandon. Their rapid comprehension means they master faster than most people. Their ability to see systems means they can get to 80% competency in a fraction of the time. But 80% is exactly where they disappear. Because getting from 80 to 95% is pure repetition. And repetition is what their brain treats as punishment. The people around them don't call it curiosity anymore. They call it flakiness. They stop trusting them with long-term projects because history shows they'll vanish. They stop investing in their ideas because every idea gets replaced by a shinier one. They stop believing in their potential because potential without follow-through looks identical to failure. And the comprehension chaser? They see all of this and think, why do people waste time perfecting things that are already figured out? Why does everyone value depth over breadth? Why am I the problem when I'm just following my curiosity? But here's what no one tells you. Being able to learn anything doesn't mean you can build anything. And understanding how things work doesn't save you from the thing it's quietly destroying. So why? Why does someone become like this? What creates a mind that treats understanding as completion? Because the answer isn't they just get distracted. The answer is deeper than that. This wiring doesn't start with lack of discipline. It starts with how their brain learned to generate reward. Maybe they grew up where novelty was the only reliable source of dopamine, where mastery wasn't celebrated, but new achievements were, where love felt conditional on bringing something impressive home, not sustained excellence. When you're young and praise comes from new accomplishments, your brain learns that value lives in discovery. You bring home an A in a new subject, you get attention. Sustained performance in the same domain, that becomes invisible. So their reward system optimized for novelty. Every new challenge triggers dopamine, but the moment comprehension arrives, the dopamine tap shuts off. Not because they're broken, because their brain learned that's when the reward stops. Or maybe their neurology just processes novelty differently. Some people have dopamine systems more sensitive to prediction error, the gap between expectation and experience. When everything is new, prediction error is high. But once a system is understood, prediction error drops to zero. And for some nervous systems, zero prediction error equals zero engagement. But they never learned to generate motivation from refinement, from going deeper instead of wider, from the satisfaction of mastery instead of the thrill of discovery. So every domain eventually becomes a solved problem. And solved problems feel like prisons. Or maybe it was environmental reinforcement. Every time they jumped to something new and picked it up fast, people called them talented, gifted, natural. Every time they stayed with something past the learning curve, nobody noticed. So their identity became quick learner instead of deep expert. And quick learners need new material to prove they're still quick. So when you're dealing with someone like this is what you're actually dealing with. Not immaturity, not fear of commitment. A nervous system that learned comprehension equals completion. That discovery is the reward, and everything after is just cleanup. And here's what makes this complicated. They're usually not wrong that they understand things quickly. They do decode systems faster than most people. They do see structures others miss. They do reach functional competency in record time. But functional competency isn't mastery, and they've spent their whole life confusing the two. Which brings us to what this costs. Not just them, everyone around them, and eventually the whole system. Constantly seeking novelty means constantly starting over. Every new domain, they're back at square one. They think they're accumulating skills, but they're really collecting introductions. That person who knows a little about everything, they're running a dopamine treadmill. They experience breadth as wealth, but what they have is a portfolio of abandoned learning curves. 50 things at 40% competency, nothing at 95%. They're tactically brilliant at picking things up quickly, but strategically blind to how expertise creates leverage that speed never can. The person who spent 10 years going deep can do things in 10 minutes that would take the fast learner 10 hours. People don't leave them because they're curious. People leave because there's no reliability. Every promise comes with an asterisk. If I'm still interested. Every commitment has a shelf life of about 6 weeks. The novelty seeker thinks people leave because they don't understand exploration. They never see that people leave because they were never given a reason to trust consistency. You can't build deep expertise with perpetual rotation. That entrepreneur who learns every new framework, still making the same revenue 3 years later. Meanwhile, their less curious competitor went deep on one skill, got exceptionally good, and built a business on actually being the best at something specific. They optimize for understanding. They miss the value in embodiment. They don't take mastery seriously because they've already mapped the territory. They're usually right that they know how it works, but they're capping their entire life at what can be understood quickly. Chasing comprehension requires constant novelty hunting. Their brain never rests, always scanning for the next interesting thing, always evaluating whether current activities still have mystery. They're not restless because they're ambitious. They're restless because their dopamine system demands novelty like a drug. Every solved problem creates withdrawal. Every mastered skill becomes boring. Relationships don't survive this because they require staying past discovery. Jobs don't survive because they require showing up after you've figured out the role. The body keeps score. The chronic starting over. The constant guilt about abandoned commitments. The exhaustion of always being a beginner. And here's what makes this vicious. The faster you comprehend, the faster you get bored. Quick understanding creates environments optimized for novelty, which triggers more novelty seeking. The loop tightens. Comprehension chaser won't commit to mastery because it feels like stagnation. Friends stop suggesting long-term projects. Friends become enablers. Comprehension chaser now only gets validated for starting new things. And if you're smart, it gets worse. Smart people comprehend faster, which means they hit the boredom threshold sooner. They understand, they're right, their brain files that under mission accomplished. They win every learning sprint. They lose every mastery marathon. And if you're self-aware about this, there's another trap. You try to force yourself to stick with things. You override your boredom. You commit to mastery. And what is that? You're now making commitment another thing to figure out, another system to decode. You're treating depth like a puzzle to solve instead of a state to inhabit. You can't think your way out of a dopamine architecture issue. And if you're watching this and thinking, but there is value in breadth, learning widely does matter, I'm just following my curiosity. That's not a counter-argument. That's the justification talking. Everyone who operates this way believes their curiosity is a virtue. That breadth is sophisticated. That depth is for people who lack imagination. And they can build an airtight case for it using examples of polymaths and generalists, which means the real question isn't, how do I force myself to stick with things? The real question is, what am I actually building? And is comprehension alone getting me there? This isn't a curiosity problem. It's a value capture problem. You're not learning too much. You're learning without converting understanding into leverage. Curiosity itself isn't the enemy. It's a tool. The problem is when you treat every act of understanding as completion, when you mistake the map for the territory, when you optimize for the number of things you've decoded instead of the depth of what you've built. Every domain falls into one of three categories: things where understanding is the value, research, analysis, strategic planning. Learning here creates immediate leverage. This is where your wiring is an advantage. Things where understanding is necessary but insufficient. Most skills, relationships, creative work, comprehension is just the entry ticket. The value comes from repetition, refinement, embodiment, and things where depth creates non-linear returns. Mastery domains, craft, expertise, winner-take-most dynamics. Being good at 10 things doesn't compete with being exceptional at one. If you're capable but broke, if you're knowledgeable but not respected, if you understand everything but can't leverage anything, you're spending 80% of your time in Category 2 and none in Category 3. You're learning skills, then leaving before they compound. Understanding systems, then abandoning them before exploitation. Building knowledge without converting it into results. Here's why just stick with it fails. It asks you to ignore your dopamine system entirely. It asks you to suffer through boredom without giving you a different reward structure, and your brain will not do that. Not because you're broken, but because dopamine is how your brain decides what's worth doing. You can't just delete the signal. You don't need less curiosity. You need better value capture. You can't control what interests you. You can control what you convert understanding into. You can't control when things get boring. You can control whether you've extracted value before you leave. Novelty has value in exploration. Depth has value in exploitation. Know which phase you're in. This is the value capture framework. Not forcing yourself to stay interested. Building systems that extract value even when interest dies. Audit everything you've learned in the past 2 years. Then ask, what did I actually build from this? What leverage did I extract? High understanding plus high conversion. These are your wins. Do more of this. High understanding plus low conversion. This is where you're bleeding. You decoded it, felt smart, then moved on. Most of your capability gap lives in high understanding plus low conversion. You're learning without building, comprehending without leveraging. When you understand something new, immediately ask, what's the smallest thing I can build from this? Then build it before moving on. When boredom arrives, that's not a signal to leave. That's the signal that the learning phase is over and the leverage phase is beginning. Set a forcing function. For every new thing you learn, produce one concrete output, a completed project, a refined skill. No output, no new input. Stop measuring success by things learned. Measure by things built, by leverage extracted, by how many times understanding became something valuable in the world. Novelty compounds in knowledge. Depth compounds in value. You can control which one you're building. This is not a weakness. This is a badly aimed strength. The same quick comprehension that makes you abandon things can make you brilliant at synthesis when redirected. The same novelty seeking that destroys depth can create strategic advantage when applied to exploration-heavy domains like research, strategy, innovation. The same boredom with repetition can build exceptional triage skills when pointed at deciding what's worth going deep on and what isn't. You don't have to become someone who loves repetition. You can stay curious, fast-learning, novelty-driven. You just have to convert understanding into leverage before you move on. But if you don't recalibrate, you will stay capable, but broke. Knowledgeable, but not respected. Understanding everything, but leveraging nothing. This is about extracting value before moving on. Same curiosity, different conversion rate. Learning is not the problem. Learning without building is. The only way to stop abandoning everything is to build something from each thing so valuable that abandoning it would cost you. Not because you've learned to love boredom, but because you've built systems that make boredom profitable. The people who seem most committed aren't more interested. They're better at capturing value. They've figured out how to extract leverage before curiosity dies. And they've stopped confusing understanding with completion. Subscribe and watch this video next.